Introduction. When agency becomes complicated as we conclude Chapter 2, we arrive at one of the most critical and risk-heavy areas of agency law, managing conflicts of interest and navigating limited representation. In commercial real estate, it is not uncommon for brokers to find themselves in situations where competing interests exist. Whether representing multiple clients, working within the same brokerage, or facilitating complex transactions with overlapping relationships, the potential for conflict is high. How these situations are handled can determine whether a transaction proceeds smoothly or results in complaints, lawsuits, or disciplinary action. Arizona law does not prohibit these relationships, but it strictly regulates how they must be disclosed and managed. Understanding conflicts of interest in commercial transactions, a conflict of interest occurs when a broker's duties to one client may be compromised by competing obligations to another party. In commercial real estate, this can happen in a variety of ways. For example, a broker may represent two tenants competing for the same retail space, or a brokerage may have one agent representing the landlord while another represents a prospective tenant. These situations are not inherently unethical or illegal, but they require careful handling. Under ACR 4-28-1101, licensees must protect and promote the client's interests while dealing fairly with all other parties. When a conflict arises, transparency and disclosure become the primary tools for maintaining compliance. Dual agency versus limited representation dual agency occurs when a broker represents both parties in the same transaction. In Arizona, this is referred to as limited representation and is permitted only with the informed, written consent of all parties involved. The key concept here is limited. When acting as a limited representative, the broker cannot advocate fully for one party over the other. Instead, the broker must remain neutral, facilitating the transaction without favoring either side. This significantly limits the level of advice and negotiation the broker can provide. The Real Estate Agency Disclosure and Election (READ) form is critical in these situations as it documents the client's understanding and consent to this type of representation. Disclosure requirements and timing proper disclosure is the cornerstone of managing agency conflicts. Disclosure must occur at the earliest practical opportunity, before confidential information is shared and before negotiations begin. This requirement is reinforced under ACR 4-28-1101 and supported by ADRE policy guidance. In commercial real estate, where negotiations can be complex and involve sensitive financial data, failing to disclose a conflict early can have serious consequences. For example, if a broker begins advising a tenant on lease terms without disclosing that another agent in their brokerage represents the landlord, this could be considered a violation of disclosure requirements and lead to disciplinary action under ARS Section 32 to 2153. Limitations on duties in limited representation. When operating under limited representation, the broker's duties change significantly. While the broker must still treat all parties honestly and fairly, they cannot provide full fiduciary advocacy to either side. This means the broker cannot disclose confidential information, cannot advise one party to the detriment of the other, and must avoid actions that create an imbalance in the transaction. For example, a broker acting as a limited representative cannot advise a buyer to offer less, while simultaneously advising the seller to hold firm on price. This neutral role can be challenging, especially in commercial transactions where negotiation strategies are often complex and highly strategic. Broker supervision and office policy requirements managing agency conflicts is not just the responsibility of the individual agent, it is a brokerage-level obligation. Under ACR 4-28-1103(b), designated brokers must establish policies and procedures to address conflicts of interest and ensure that agents understand how to handle them. This includes training on disclosure requirements, documentation standards, and appropriate communication practices. Brokerages must also maintain records of all disclosures and consents related to limited representation. Failure to implement and enforce these policies can expose the broker to liability and disciplinary action. Risk management strategies for agents. Successfully managing agency conflicts requires a proactive approach. Agents should identify potential conflicts early, communicate openly with all parties, and document everything. One of the most effective strategies is to have clear, written policies and to consistently use standardized forms like the READ. Additionally, agents should know when to step back and recommend that clients seek independent representation if a conflict cannot be managed appropriately. In commercial real estate, where transactions can involve significant financial stakes, taking a conservative and transparent approach is often the best way to protect both the client and the agent. Real-world application. Commercial scenario. Consider a scenario where a brokerage represents a landlord leasing office space, and another agent within the same brokerage is working with a tenant interested in that property. This creates an in-house conflict. If both parties agree to limited representation and proper disclosures are made using the READ form, the transaction can proceed. However, both agents must understand that their ability to advocate is limited, and the broker must ensure compliance at every step. If handled correctly, the transaction can close successfully. If mishandled, it can result in complaints, lost trust, and potential disciplinary action. Bringing it all together, ending Chapter 2 agency relationships in commercial real estate are not always straightforward. As we have seen throughout this chapter, establishing agency requires more than just disclosure. It requires clear agreements, proper documentation, and ongoing management of potential conflicts. Limited representation and conflict management are where many agents make mistakes, often unintentionally. By understanding the legal requirements, maintaining transparency, and following brokerage policies, agents can navigate these challenges successfully. This concludes Chapter 2, where we have built the foundation for how agency relationships are properly established and managed in commercial transactions. As we move into the next chapter, we will begin exploring how these relationships translate into real-world negotiation and transaction execution. Online discussion. Why is early disclosure critical when a conflict of interest arises? Answer. It ensures all parties understand the situation before negotiations begin and helps prevent violations of fiduciary duties and disclosure laws. What is the biggest limitation of limited representation? Answer. The broker cannot fully advocate for one party and must remain neutral, limiting the ability to provide strategic advice. When should a broker recommend separate representation? Answer. When a conflict cannot be managed fairly or when the client's interests may be compromised under limited representation.